Hello, Mantas. Thank you for being here with us today. He's a senior researcher and research manager at the Policy Research Center, PPMI, co-author of the report Mapping and Analysis of Student-Centered Learning and Teaching Practices, Usable Knowledge to Support More Inclusive, High-Quality Higher Education. Thank you very much, Mantas. He has a experience of over 7 years in policy analysis and providing advice to policymakers, mainly in the areas of higher education, research, and innovation. He's responsible for setting up an overall management of large-scale complex analytic assignments that help the European Commission and national governments to develop better policies. And since the very beginning of his career, Mantas has also been heavily involved in designing and implementing performance monitoring systems, developing measurable and actionable indicators and tracking their achievement progress. So thank you very much, Mantas. It's an honor to have you with us today and to help us and enlighten us to get better programs and meet the European Commission commitment, which is to develop student-centered programs. So thank you very much, Mantas.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here.
So you can start sharing the screen if you want. And we have almost all audience who was in the morning session. Still some are joining within a few minutes. And we will see again a reminder to all participants. If you want to do comment live, not writing, you can raise your hand in the section of participants. You can raise your hand. If you just want to drop question at any time of Mantas' presentation, you can leave in the function of questions and answers. And we as the moderators and Mantas himself will be able to respond to your questions, suggestions, comments. And we hope this session will be interesting and useful for all of us.
So, hello everyone. As I said, I am very happy to be here. Thank you, Neringa and Małgorzata, for inviting me to this interesting event. And I want to start my presentation with saying thank you for being part of the European University Alliances and really pushing this initiative forward. And I think that this initiative indeed brings together the best what we have in Europe, both in higher education and research. And indeed, as you know very well, this is a flagship initiative by the European Commission. So basically, you are at the forefront for sure of European higher education policy. And thank you for this. And I'm happy to be part of what you are doing. I will start my presentation with telling a bit about me, because I'm sure you would like to know who I am while listening to me. I am Mantas Pupinis from Policy Research Center, PPMI. We like to think of ourselves as a bridge, basically, as a bridge between academia, between business world, between technology and expert world, and policy making. So what we do in our everyday activity, we basically try to bring the best knowledge to policy and decision makers so that they can improve the policies which shape our lives, both at the EU and the national level. And I myself am focusing mostly on higher education and research policy. And therefore, I think the knowledge that I have to share today will be very relevant for the majority of you who are working in higher education institutions. And I would also like to tell that I am speaking on behalf of the NESET network as well, because for the most part of my presentation, I will be talking about the findings stemming from our study, which we did as part of the NESET network for the European Commission to help the European Commission shape their policy related to student-centered learning in higher education. And the key questions that we have addressed were how to make higher education of better quality and more inclusive through using student-centered learning and teaching techniques. So I think my presentation will be very well linked to what you have discussed in your first session in the morning with Pedro, because he discussed how young people think. And I will basically discuss how to transfer this power to learn, this learning experience, more from teachers to students, how to make sure that students take responsibility for their learning and engage in truly active and deep learning, as this is the key in the definition of student-centered learning and teaching. So as I said, majority of what I will be speaking about is stemming from the recent study that we did with 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗃 from Harvard University and my colleague 𝗘𝗨-𝗘𝗫𝗄𝗃 from PPMI, with a lot of strong contributions from 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗃𝗫𝗄𝗃 from University of St. Gallen. And you may know that Manya and Sabina are currently developing a Routledge handbook on student-centered learning and teaching, which will be like encyclopedia about student-centered learning techniques. And we drew a lot on their upcoming book to develop our conclusions and key policy pointers for both policymakers and also especially higher education institutions practitioners. So the key achievements of our report is to present, first of all, notable real-world practices. So our report has an annex with 74 real-world practices, how student-centered learning and teaching techniques can be applied in a variety of ways and variety of contexts to really bring value to higher education process. Secondly, we also reviewed recent top-level academic research about this issue. And as I said, we drew a lot on the upcoming Routledge handbook on student-centered learning and teaching. So basically, we try to look not only what is really happening at the universities and many European universities initiative, but also try to understand by building on the state-of-the-art empirical and theoretical research, how these practices actually bring about change to what we do in higher education process. Also, our study provides a self-assessment tool for higher education institutions, which you can take and actually use as a white paper, as a blueprint for developing student-centered learning and teaching policies and practices in your own institutions. So indeed, our whole study can be taken as a white paper and very practically applied to shape how you do things in your institutions and to make your activities more student-centered. One of the key conclusions that we make in the report, that student-centered learning is, first of all, founded on the concept of student agency. There is a huge discussion in the literature about student-centered learning and teaching. What is this key ingredient to make something, an activity, student-centered? So some of the literature say that these key ingredients are student engagement or student satisfaction. So basically making sure that students are kind of happy in what they're doing in higher education institution and they are satisfied both about process and the outcomes. However, our research shows that student satisfaction and student engagement may actually be also achieved within a traditional higher education, more teacher-centered paradigm, while student agency is something as a key for student-centered learning and teaching, which means that student-centered learning and teaching, first of all, focuses on transferring the responsibility for learning and this deep learning into the minds of the student and not the process or not the teacher. While the teacher and the environment are very important in this process, but student-centered learning and teaching emphasizes that learning has to happen in the mind of the student, and responsibility for learning is, first of all, with the student. So in our report, we also say that there actually exists two different paradigms. We even use this strong word paradigm of how teaching and learning happens in higher education institutions. So we say that there's a teacher-centered paradigm where the focus is on what teachers teach and the information they try to transfer to the students, and the student-centered paradigm to which we are currently shifting and to which the European Commission, for example, wants to shift the process of higher education institutions, is a student-centered paradigm. So there's a shift in focus of higher education institutions from what teachers teach to what students learn. And we have many areas in higher education institutions where we can feel this change. This is why we think this is not just some kind of a practice like classroom practice or some specific activities which we do. Student-centered learning and teaching is not only that. It changes almost all key areas of how higher education institutions function. And as you see in my slide, I especially emphasize the learning outcomes. So first of all, student-centered learning has to be focused in particular on learning outcomes. Basically, students need to know what they will know and be able to do as a result of their studies, and the whole process has to be focused on these learning outcomes, and they have to be mainstreamed through everything which happens in the study program. So in the individual courses, in all seminars, lectures, and the whole study program, everyone has to be sure how everything leads to achievement of these learning outcomes. In addition, this changes many other aspects and principles, how things work in higher education institution. So in student-centered learning environment, there's also a shift of what content and learning means. So the content has to basically inspire the students to learn by themselves and has to be developed in such a way so that students are able to really learn also alone and not only, when listening to the lectures of the teacher. There's also a change in the function of learning, which means that in student-centered learning and teaching paradigm, teachers have to apply these high-impact classroom and out-of-classroom learning practices, which tries to shift this responsibility of learning to the students so that they engage in cognitively deep learning. There is also a change in the balance of power and roles of students and teachers. So the teacher in student-centered learning and teaching paradigm is not so much as just a communicator of knowledge, but the teacher becomes really a consultant, a co-creator of knowledge together with the student, which means also that the role of assessment changes. This means that assessment has to be more formative rather than summative assessment. So students have to be able to react to their assessment and be assessed more frequently throughout the learning process. And the student has to really help throughout this whole period of learning. The teacher has to help for the student to become better and not to basically decide very early in the study program on the students' capacities, but actually let students to do errors and actually repeat this assessment so that we can see that the student is becoming more advanced in what they are learning. So one of the key things that we want to show with our report is that student-centered learning and teaching is not only a classroom practice, not only a pedagogy, like the way how teachers organize the learning process, but rather it is an ecosystem with many elements working together to make sure that the whole process of education, which happens in higher education institutions, is student-centered. And here you can see basically a main tool which we came out with after our study. This is 10 elements of student-centered learning and teaching which have to exist that we can say that the process, the education process in higher education institution is really student-centered. And we say that these elements are mutually reinforcing, which means that it doesn't suffice to have only one or few of these elements to know that higher education institution is student-centered. A truly student-centered higher education institution should have all of these elements, and by mutually reinforcing, we also mean that these elements converge towards student-centered learning and teaching ecosystem, which means that having a few of them leads you to this critical mass of having others as well. For example, if you have, institution-wide policy and strategy, how to support more student-centered learning, this will lead you to actually adopt student-centered curriculum and pedagogy, and also student-centered assessment, which will lead you to provide more support to learner and teacher, how to be more student-centered. So this works together, all these elements work together and basically mutually reinforce each other to bring about a student-centered learning and teaching ecosystem. And now I'm going to share with you the key ideas about each of these key elements. So we start with institutional policies, rules, and regulations, which should be there in higher education institutions to support student-centered learning and teaching, because student-centered learning and teaching, as we see, can only thrive in an institutional environment which really has the student-centered learning as a strategy. We recently did another study for the European Commission about quality assurance in higher education, where we surveyed all higher education institutions in the European higher education area. I believe your institutions may have also responded to this survey. So we sent the survey to all Erasmus Charter holders in Europe to ask many things, but we also asked them, what is most important for you? Like, what are the most important recent changes or recent trends which actually had a highest impact on how you do higher education in your institution and on the quality of higher education institution. So here you can see the results on this question, and you can see that among three strongest responses is institutional leadership in my organization. So higher education institution staff said that basically institutional leadership, and really even the rector and the vice rectors, what they talk about, what they say, has a huge impact. So we see if the leaders of an institution speak about student-centered learning and teaching and really promote this in everything they do, this becomes a culture in an organization, and this is the first way how to make sure that universities work in student-centered ways. And also this student-centered mindedness, so to say, has to be mainstreamed also through other rules and regulations governing teaching behavior and teacher hiring and promotion, and also student behavior, and has to be linked to all other policies that are implemented in higher education institutions. We also noticed from our study that it helps a lot if there exists certain specific initiatives to advance student-centered learning and teaching, something like projects or like days to communicate for the students and teachers how to do the student-centered learning and teaching, and to showcase some examples. And also we noted that funding can contribute a lot, of course, to steering the process, the educational process in a higher education institution towards more student-centeredness. And from our analysis, we saw that some of the most useful funding instruments, for example, provided at the national level to promote student-centered learning and teaching are, for example, performance-based funding or project funding, which directly asks universities to design student-centered learning and teaching activities. While block funding perhaps is not so supportive of student-centered learning and teaching, because then the whole responsibility lies only with a higher education institution, and sometimes it is quite difficult to make this step from more how things were done all the time to this more student-centered paradigm. The second key element of student-centered learning and teaching is curriculum and pedagogy. Of course, something which actually happens in the classrooms and out of classrooms, how teachers design the learning process for the students. And as I said, and I cannot really stress this enough, that everything starts with the learning outcomes. They cannot be just formal statements which no one heard. They have to be really mainstreamed through the whole educational process, and to acknowledge if you are teaching in a student-centered way, you have to ask yourself, first of all, do learning outcomes really are they decoded so that they are not just statements in terms of the jargon, disciplinary jargon that you use in your course, in your discipline, but actually they provide this good balance between being academic and kind of being understandable for the practitioners, especially for the business community, for example. You have to think in a way, if someone not from university, not from academia would see these learning outcomes, would they think that the student really knows something useful, something applicable in the world, be it business or academia? And this takes me to the second point, saying that you also have to ask, do learning outcomes connect to lived experiences, to the experiences that students are already facing in their everyday life and they will face, especially in the job market? Because student-centered learning and teaching paradigm, first of all, sees students as whole persons, not only as someone who is sitting in an auditorium and learning the things that he or she is currently learning, but also as a person who may have a family, may have a job, is connected to community. So when developing learning outcomes, you have to think that they are relevant for this life of students which happen out of the university. And also learning outcomes have to reflect gradual progression towards the upper level of expertise in terms of, for example, Bloom's taxonomy. So learning outcomes for each course should show this progression from being able to memorize and repeat certain information towards actually creating a content in a certain discipline, becoming an expert accepted by also academics and experts in a certain discipline. And another aspect which is extremely important for student-centered curriculum and pedagogy is applying high-impact classroom practices. So learning outcomes are not enough. To know these learning outcomes is not enough. You need to really use certain techniques to transfer this learning experience from the process, from the teacher, as I said, from what happens in the classroom to really the minds of the student. And for this, you have to use these so-called high-impact classroom practices, such as these shown in my slide, like research-based learning, collaborative learning, technology-enhanced learning, something which really pushes students not to just listen or read about certain knowledge, but actually to apply it and to create new knowledge. This is perhaps also one of the core aspects of what student-centered learning and teaching is. And we also notice that there are beneficial implications of applying these techniques that I told you about. As I said, we analyzed over 74 actual practices, how student-centered learning and teaching techniques are applied in universities, and we saw that they bring about the following implications or some kind of impacts that happen in the higher education process. So we see that by applying student-centered learning and teaching techniques, responsibility indeed shifts from teachers to students, and the teacher's role shifts from lecturer to facilitator to indeed co-creator of knowledge of the learning process with the student. We also saw the change in the mindsets, both of teachers and students, which led to the changes in the balance of power. Actually, the teachers themselves were satisfied with this kind of process, and they were okay with really giving much more responsibility to students in shaping what happens in the classroom, because they really enjoy this process of being co-creators of knowledge and the process with the students, and therefore relationships between teachers and students usually change in student-centered environments, and teachers become more as partners and co-learners with students rather than passive communicators of knowledge. Another element in the student-centered ecosystem is student-centered assessment, because indeed, if you start from the institutional practices that promote student-centered learning and teaching, and you apply student-centered learning and teaching techniques, these high-impact classroom activities, you cannot really escape using more student-centered assessment, which, as I explained previously, goes from being more summative in the end of the whole learning process to more formative and frequent, so that actually assessment in student-centered learning and teaching environment happens in different forms and more frequently throughout the learning process in different types of peer-to-peer assessment, self-assessment, quizzes, all kinds of essays, which actually build then towards the final assessment of the student by the end of the course or study program. Also, not only learning outcomes, but also student assessment has to reflect this progress in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. As I said, how showing and assessing how student proceeds from just understanding the information, remembering it, and actually creating valuable, high quality new content. And student-centered assessment should provide possibilities to learn from mistakes and actually, to a certain extent, even repeat the assessments so that students are able to become better in this discipline. Although, of course, this has to be interpreted in a context. Of course, we cannot allow the students to repeat some kind of examinations over and over again. So there has to be a certain balance between this progress and growing and really responsibility to be responsible for the learning outcomes and the knowledge learned. Another important element in our framework is flexible learning pathways. Indeed, in student-centered learning and teaching, students must be able to select what, how, when, and where to learn. And this is enabled by these so-called flexible learning pathways. And in my slide, you see the 5 main elements of flexible learning pathways. So the first element is the pathways themselves. So in student-centered learning and teaching environment, students may be able to self-design programs to select certain modules which they would like or would not like to attend. We also have to ensure flexible entry routes that students with different backgrounds could be able to enter certain study programs. And this is also related a lot to recognition of prior learning, of alternative credentials, comparable courses in other programs, which help students from different routes of life and education to enter certain study programs. And flexible learning pathways also encourage and promote mobility and flexibility, which is especially important when the student body is really getting more diverse, and the universities are faced with the need, or understand the need to really engage and include students from different paths of life. So flexibility in terms of evening classes, flexible schedules, combining education, work, and family is a must-have in a student-centered learning and teaching ecosystem. And the pathways, learning pathways, have to be flexible not only in the way how students go through their education process or how they get accepted to the study programs, but also to prevent dropouts and to explain how students can exercise flexibility, especially in at top universities, for example, the United States, as we were discussing with Manya, who is lead author of this report from Harvard University. For them, an important issue is becoming now not how to ensure these flexible pathways when a student is already accepted, or like how to accept students from different ways of life, because they're doing this quite well already. But for them, the key challenge is becoming how to make sure that students don't drop out, how to support them if you see that it's maybe too difficult already for them to study, but you see the potential in them. So flexible learning pathways are also about ensuring that and supporting students in a way that they are able to complete the courses and to really go into the path which is best aligned with their talents. Another element in our framework is learning and teaching support. This emphasizes that while the key responsibility for learning in student-centered learning and teaching paradigm is with a student, and also teacher has a lot of responsibility to facilitate this learning process and to support a student in it, the environment, the whole administration of higher education institution plays a role as well. We see that only in those institutions, student-centered learning and teaching thrive, which provides support both for learners and for teachers. So, for example, speaking about learning support, when assessing if we have a student-centered learning and teaching environment in our university, we should ask ourselves whether we have thorough learning support services and how accessible they are for the students. And also we must ask, how are they linked to study programs and courses? Because we see that many of the learning support services provided in many universities are quite formal. They provide a bit, support which is related to maybe simple tasks which the student has to do in the university, like more related to community activities or like job market, but not so much linked to the study programs and courses. So actually in the learning support, we should think how to involve also teachers, also academics, or how to prepare the learning support services staff to really advise students also on the content of study programs. What could they learn, how they could learn in the best way. It is also very important how the effectiveness of these services are monitored and measured. This is the key aspect for ensuring good quality assurance of student-centered learning and teaching practices. And I will speak more about quality assurance towards the end of my presentation. Finally, for the learning support services, it is very important to mind the diversified student body and also some students which may come from more vulnerable life situations. Student-centered learning and teaching indeed means making sure that opportunities to do high-quality learning, to engage in deep learning are available for all students. Doesn't matter what is their life background. Finally, sometimes we seem to think that, teachers, they are experts in their area, so perhaps they just know what to do by themselves. But our study showed that teaching support services in universities and overall teaching kind of support philosophy in the university is perhaps even the most important part of student-centered learning and teaching, because teachers have to lead students through their study process and really be meaningful facilitators, and it often means not less work for teachers but actually more work, when you don't need just to communicate certain information for students, but you actually need to creatively support the student in such a way that he or she engages in more deep learning and really is inspired to take up this learning by themselves. So teaching support services have to exist in universities. For example, professional development opportunities for teaching staff should be provided. What is especially important in nowadays is to ensure adequate workload and working conditions for teachers, which allow for professional development, because we see that the workload in higher education institutions is increasing and working conditions becoming more difficult. It seems that in some universities, for teachers, it is difficult to find the time to develop themselves because they are overwhelmed, with teaching activities and also a lot of bureaucratic tasks. So higher education institutions leadership have to think how to change and facilitate this situation in order to make sure that teachers can do their high-quality work in supporting the students to become more responsible and self-sustainable in their learning process. It is also important to recognize teaching excellence, teaching awards, recognizing excellence in supporting students really raises the teaching profession to the forefront at the university, because we see that there's quite some problem. We see from many of our studies we did for the European Commission that research activities, are seen as of higher esteem than teaching activities in many universities, and usually in the promotion panels or hiring panels, the participants look mainly at research produced by certain academic staff and not at the teaching achievements. So this balance between promoting and respecting research and teaching has to be better in the future if higher education institutions want to really foster this student-centered environment and context. And I will share with you again one of the answers to our study that we did for the Commission about Quality Assurance in Higher Education. So this question actually asked exactly about the motivational measures and practices to promote professional development of teaching staff. And as you see in this graph, and what was one of the main conclusions of our study, that actually this promotion of personal development and teaching excellence is among the worst developed aspects currently in European higher education institutions. So we must have this in mind and really put support for the teaching staff, you know, at the forefront of our institutional strategies. Finally, it is important not only what teachers and students do in the classroom and out of the classroom, but to have a really student-centered learning and teaching environment, we must ensure that the spaces, university spaces, which we use for learning and teaching are designed for student-centered learning. So, for example, we must ensure that active learning spaces exist around the university and in the auditoriums that allow to seamlessly go from one type of activities to other type of activities. For example, to transit from lecture to group work to certain presentations. It is very good if there is a possibility to write certain things like on, for example, writing surfaces or like a digital boards and then to share them on the common screen. Finally, active learning spaces have to ensure also the just good acoustic and lightings, air quality, temperature and ventilation so that it's comfortable for students and teachers to do their best in these environments, because we know that active learning is really, energy intensive activity. If people get inspired, they can be too hot, and we need to make sure that the learning spaces are such in which students and teachers can show their true potential and be inspired and motivated. And also same with the academic libraries. We see in nowadays world that libraries are becoming not just places where you go to read books, but actually they are indeed becoming these active learning spaces where students and teachers come together to discuss what they have learned in the classroom or individually. And the academic libraries have to be prepared to offer these active learning spaces and learning services. It is also very important that the student's opinion is included in redesigning academic libraries and learning spaces whenever possible. We also described a few of such practices in our report, where it was very beneficial indeed, where when the university decided to redesign the library, and basically they asked the students how they think the library should look like. And indeed, they measured that the library was much more visited after this. So basically, the opinions of students and staff are very important when making these infrastructure decisions as well. And as with everything in student-centered learning and teaching paradigm, it is also extremely important to collect the data on the use of libraries and active learning spaces about the satisfaction of use, because the data is very important for making sure if the university provides high quality services and for quality assurance. To make sure that all this that I told you about until now happens, learning technologies and really ICT solutions and educational innovations in ICT help a lot. Indeed, I think that these trends in the world, this shift towards more student-centered learning and teaching, and this shift towards more digital ways of doing things are happening together and reinforcing each other. So it is beneficial for student-centered learning and teaching if there is some blended element in the courses. If, for example, students can engage in this more like flipped classroom approach, if they could watch, for example, online certain lectures at home and then come to exercise the skills and theory they learned in the classroom. We also, to make sure that we have these learning technologies available in our university, we should also ask questions and try to do certain impact assessment, what technology support is available for students and teachers in our universities, and provide training for teachers and students on how to use technology. I think this need became extremely visible during the situation which we are currently facing with the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of learning transferred from the classrooms, from auditoriums to the digital space. And I know at least we in Lithuania, where I am currently based, we've heard that universities faced quite some issues with a smooth transition to digital learning, but then indeed they caught up quite quickly, and I've heard about that many of the top universities provided certain training in different technologies and tried to use a variety of technologies until they learned which of those work well. And we should not forget this experience also in the good times without pandemic, which I'm sure are coming sooner or later. As I've also mentioned in my very first slides, it is important that incentives for using technology are provided by the university leadership. For example, also through certain increased funding, which would make sure that university teachers want to apply these technologies. One of the final elements in our framework, which should lead to student-centered learning and teaching, is community learning connections. So we say that university cannot be a closed entity to encourage a truly student-centered learning. Students have to be able to go out to the world, to interact with future employers, to interact with NGOs, to do traineeships, to also interact at an institutional level with various research units, entrepreneurship centers, to have this truly student-centered experience. For example, as I said, with learning outcomes, that it is most important that these learning outcomes somehow include together both the academic knowledge and also practical knowledge, which will be useful for the world. So university always have to seek for ways to engage with local, but not only in these times, also global businesses, NGOs, so that the students could perhaps go to work with them to try out the academic knowledge which they learn in the classroom. And finally, a bit shorter discussion about quality assurance at an institution. I just want to tell here that basically everything I told you about until now should be measured, at least to some extent, to really understand to which extent higher education institution is operating in a student-centered way. So here I just present certain ways of measuring the activities that I told you about and feeding them into the decision process, which you can later on just take and try to apply in your universities. One of the sadder conclusions that we made in our study is that for the most part, we think we're still living in a teacher-centered or more traditional education paradigm. And as I've already hinted during my presentation, this may be to an extent related to the working conditions in higher education, that we see that really teaching workloads are increasing, class sizes are expanding, and this a bit just allows the teaching staff to really work effectively and with what they have to do without much thinking how to apply certain different practices, other practices which they were not engaging in so far, and be really creating and supporting students and facilitating study process. We also see, as you may have seen in the European Universities Association recent study, we see the declining investment in higher education in many countries and declining job security in tertiary education, which also doesn't contribute to people being calm and really satisfied so that they can engage in this creative and inspiring learning process. However, I want to end my presentation with a conclusion that at least looking at the European level policy context and what the European Commission is currently supporting, for example, the European University Alliances, which you are part of, I think the future is bright, also in the next funding period of Erasmus+, for example. As far as I know, this European Commission will try to more and more support student-centered learning and teaching activities through everything they try to support through Erasmus+, for example, and other activities. For example, at the moment, together with other experts, I am also part of the study on European framework for micro-credentials, where the European Commission is looking how to make sure that alternative credentials are better recognized both in higher education institutions and in labor market, to make sure that the pathways that students can pick are as flexible as possible and as responsible to these real situations that students find themselves in their everyday lives. So I think at least at the European level, we are on a good path to support more student-centered learning and teaching. And I think, as I see from many national governments, many of them, I think, also believe in this agenda and also want to be part of this change together with the European Commission. And now I would like to thank you for your attention, and I am ready to take your questions. I will now try to open the questions and answers box to see what you are asking. Perhaps Neringa or Małgorzata can also help me with this. If you see certain questions, just tell me. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Mantas. We will help you with the with the questions. So we have our questions and answer chats and the other chat. So please feel free. So there's people starting to comment, and thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was so intense, and a lot of things to think that people were listening and not chatting and not raising questions as for the moment. But I'm sure we will have. Anna, what's your impression? I have to say the survey of Mantas expanded my understanding of student-centered teaching and learning. It's much wider than I was expecting earlier. What's your impression?
Yeah, from the point of view of the Academic Council of CONEXUS, it's true that we all know, since we wrote the application for the CONEXUS Alliance, we knew about the student-centered education and how we have to promote it, but we didn't understand exactly what it was. So I agree with 値ρήνα that this it has expanded our vision, and also the idea, some take-home messages I would take is that it's not only thinking about the students, about what the students would need, but it's also asking the students. So student-centered means also to set up ways to ask them what they need and what are the most useful teaching resources, for example, or how to get an orientation of the program that are suiting their needs. So it really has expanded our, at least in my case, the vision. And what you were saying about the spaces, about movable furniture, etc., it's something we have already discussed at the CONEXUS Governing Board, because we know some examples from other universities where they are setting up different sizes of classes, of classrooms, some areas for students to collaborate, and some dedicated areas. And it is a reflection we've done already since the beginning of the project, of how it's not only about sharing the facilities, but also maybe creating new facilities and new organizations, so that the way we would like to teach is also shown, and it is also possible at the spatio-temporal level. So really very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I think, Anna, you basically discussed one of the main conclusions stemming from our study, which we understood by really scanning and analyzing the student-centered learning and teaching practices applied in universities, that it's quite a wide, list of elements. I mean that before we see, and in many literature, you can see that student-centered learning and teaching was understood mainly as something which happens in the classroom. So these like kind of classroom practices like research-based learning or flipped classrooms. But our study really revealed that it's much more than that. You must have the whole ecosystem. As I said, to also the kind of institutional leadership, institutional strategy, support for learners and teachers so that they know what they are doing. So it's not only about what happens in the classroom and what happens when the student is learning individually, but it's the whole ecosystem. This is the main thing that we wanted to change in the mindsets of many people who think and write about student-centered learning and teaching.
Thank you very much, Mantas. So is there
no
questions?
Maybe. So Mantas, I know that you did a lot of interviews and surveys in the universities for your report. Well, probably it's not ethical to ask which universities are the most advanced in applying this concept of student-centered teaching and learning. But maybe you could, I mean, if you can, please reveal the names. On the other hand, I would be interested, did you notice any tendencies that this concept, does it go from bottom up or top down? Because here, where our audience is mostly teaching staff, and we do not have so many institutional administration representatives at the moment. So we would be like bottom up, maybe initiative. Of course, there are some other initiatives going top down. What would be, how usually does it start, this complex implementation of this concept at the universities? From the teachers or from the administration?
Thank you, Neringa, for a good question. Actually, we tackled this question not only in this study that I was mainly discussing in my presentation, but also a lot in another study on quality assurance in higher education, which we did for the European Commission last year, and which will influence this European approach on quality assurance coming up quite soon in the Commission's communication. So we did tackle this issue about whether you should start student-centered learning and teaching environment from top down or bottom up. And I think what I can definitely say that top down is a must. So we saw actually that leadership is very important in higher education institutions if you want to especially change something. So it is very helpful, and usually the change initiative starts like this. If, for example, a rector comes with a new kind of strategy to really change how teaching and learning is being done at the universities, to promote teaching excellence, and really is inspiring all the academic staff through his or her own activities. Of course, in reality, teaching and learning happens between teachers and students. So the classroom practices and the real learning process is also important. But if you want to really build this ecosystem in the university, it has to be heard. So sometimes we see that this leadership is coming not necessarily from rectors or someone leading universities, but also from teaching staff. Like we see actually in some very advanced universities like Harvard, for example, and we developed this study together with 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗫, who received the Teaching Excellence Award as the best teacher at Harvard, actually. So you could see that, for example, she is a lot promoting this at Harvard, and you see these thought leaders also in other universities who you would say are at the forefront of student-centered learning and teaching. That leadership is a must, but it could come from either institutional leadership like rectors or some really thought leaders as academics, which others are looking up to and trying to apply what they're doing and what students love them for. And regarding the universities which are doing well, I'm afraid I can't tell the names, being in the kind of industry where I am, working with also the governments and the higher education institutions. I wouldn't like to go into the names, but I think from what I told, you can imagine, some of the universities, I mean, and it's not necessarily some kind of very well-known universities which have very good, lots of like big budgets and good communication policies, but we can see actually that quite often smaller and more focused universities are able to really design this engaging student-centered learning and teaching environment. So I think actually in your university, this may be really doable, as you are focusing on urban coastal sustainability like you really have a certain content to engage around, which is very important, because if we see the universities or alliances of universities don't have this common kind of idea and focus, it's much more difficult to apply student-centered learning and teaching, because student-centered learning is always about content. So this is my answer, and I'm looking forward to other questions.
Thank you very much, Mantas. So we have a question from Edita from 𝗘𝗨 University, Lithuania. Where can we find good practice examples of student-centered learning? Maybe there is some link in the internet.
Yes, so they are attached as an annex to the study that I was speaking about. So if you just Google that study or look at my presentation, you will find this annex. And also, as I mentioned, there are basically two tools that we produced as a result of the study, which are practically very relevant for universities. So one is this list of practices applied in real universities, which we thought are could be seen as good practices. Maybe this will in part answer also to Neringa's question, which universities are doing well. You can see there the ones that we highlighted. And also as another tool, we have produced this self-assessment manual, where basically teachers and especially perhaps administrations could go through with the questions to see where they are already part of the student-centered learning and teaching paradigm, and where they could still strengthen how they do higher education.
Thank you. And for everybody, we will share the slides and links, and you can see the link we posted in the chat of this report, and you can go further.
Thank you very much, Mantas and Neringa. There is a question from Amanda Santos. She is the leader of the work package in charge of developing new programs in CONEXUS. And she was asking, how can we apply this information, this perspective, when generating or designing a new study program? Any advices on how to start a new program that is centered? And I would like to add on this question, is it possible to generate a student-centered program, or shall we do a student-centered strategy? Can we start at the program level? This is a general question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a very valuable question, I think. And indeed, you can start with a study program. And part of our report tells directly how to do this, because especially the parts where we speak about curriculum and pedagogy, about the actual techniques to be applied in the classroom, and also student-centered assessment, they can be directly applied to designing study programs. And I would definitely advise you to look at these parts, because as I said, they are already designed as more like white papers, like blueprints, which you can take and apply directly, and also with linking to examples of these best practices. So indeed, you can start with a study program, and I think this is where you should start, because as we know, institution-wide changes are much more difficult. They take more time, and you have to push this process both top-down and bottom-up.
Thank you very much. We will definitely go through each of the points of the report. I think it's going to be of very, very useful and helpful for us. So are there any further questions? There are several places. Yeah.
Yeah, we were checking, so no more questions. Well, my final note would be, it is students learning and teaching. I mean, learning, it's not only teaching, but also learning. So it is both ways. And the key players also in this process are the teachers. And Mantas emphasized how important it is to support the teachers. We cannot request from them to do everything, apply new methodologies, technologies, and satisfy the needs of the market, of the students. But student-centered teaching and learning is also the concept that needs to facilitate the teachers. So I'm very glad that this International Staff Training Week, with our 3 days short intensive program, we're actually responding in a way to the needs, and we are talking about this. And I'm very happy. Today, during our sessions, we had 80 plus participants, teachers, administrative staff from our EU-CONEXUS and other universities in Europe. So we are trying to respond to this as well. Anna, maybe you some final notes? And
yes, thank you very much, Neringa. So just as a final summary, thank you again, Mantas, for this enlightenment for us, all of the not only the leaders of different work packages, but also the people that are working in the working groups to develop the new programs. I'm sure they have enjoyed a lot your talk. I think we're going to include some of your proposals in our way of work in the following months, because we are really at the time where we have identified the topic. What you said about the advantage for our consortium is that we have a particular topic, which is the basis to expand and to interact with other institutions, external institutions, and to build up on this. And in our case, we also feel that that this is true, that and we have also within CONEXUS already set up the topics of each of the programs we're going to develop. And now how to construct and put all these Lego pieces together for this, we really need to take into account this shift, this change in our mind, so that we don't replicate the teacher-centered system, which is what all of us we have already inside. So it was really enlightening. Thank you very much, Mantas. And
thank you very much as well, and thank you again for being, you know, at the forefront of this new European Universities Initiative. I think it should feel good, you know, to be part of something new and something which will probably be a thing of the future. So, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you very much, Mantas. It's a white page we all have to fill, this new European Universities Initiative, but with the help of all professionals like you, it's going to be much easier. So thank you very much.